If you ever find yourself at 15,000 feet, 4,570 meters above sea level, lungs gasping like a fish on a kitchen counter, and the wind trying to strip the warmth from your bones, you will notice something surprising. People live here. Not just live, but thrive. And the reason, oddly enough, is butter. Not the sort that comes neatly wrapped in shiny foil bricks in a supermarket dairy case. I mean yak butter. Yak butter is one of those foods that sounds like a punchline the first time you hear about it. Butter from a yak? Really? But the communities of Tibet, Nepal, Bhutan, Mongolia, and other high Himalayan plateaus, it is as essential as oxygen itself. Without it, they could not endure winters that would make even a polar bear ask for central heating. Yak butter is food, fuel, medicine, money, and if you can believe it, art. It is one of those cultural keystones that binds together survival and spirituality in a way that makes you pause and think, my God, we are an ingenious species. Welcome, cheese and dairy enthusiasts. Whether you're all about Gouda, goat cheese, or a classic cheddar, we're here to share the love of all things dairy with you. So, sit back, relax, and get ready for a fun, cheesy experience. Before we get to the butter lamps glowing in ancient monasteries, or the monks sculpting entire pantheons out of nothing but butter and coloured dye, we should begin with a far simpler question. How on earth do you make butter from a yak? After all, these aren't docile dairy cows ambling about English meadows. Yaks are shaggy, ponderous beasts with horns that could puncture an inattentive herder and a temperament that suggests they'd rather be left alone. And yet, from these gruff creatures comes astonishingly rich milk, almost double the fat content of cow's milk and just begging to be turned into butter. The process begins not in a modern stainless steel dairy, but in a smoky yak hair tent pitched against the wind. Picture this: a herder woman, after carefully milking her yak, no small feat given the animal's habit of kicking, sets the milk aside. But unlike us, who might pasteurize or refrigerate it, she lets it sit. For a day or more, the milk ferments ever so slightly, developing a tang that would horrify most Western supermarket inspectors, but is precisely what makes butter making possible at altitude. Then the real labour begins. There are two classic methods, both ingenious in their rusticity. The first is the wooden churn, a tall, narrow barrel, sometimes as big as a toddler, fitted with a plunger on a stick. The milk, warmed a little to encourage fat globules to mingle, is poured in. Then comes the plunging. For an hour or two, sometimes longer, the plunger is worked up and down, thump, 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 until the milk surrenders its golden fat. At last, butter rises to the top, soft and yellow, to be scooped out by hand. The second method is even more extraordinary. The hide bag churn. Imagine pouring your milk into a goatskin bag, inflating it with air like some sort of agricultural balloon animal, tying it up, and then shaking it until your arms feel like jelly. Sometimes the bag is slung from a saddle and jiggled by the movement of a pony. It is gloriously practical, portable, durable, and effective. After enough vigorous shaking, the same miracle occurs. Butter emerges, separating itself from buttermilk. Yak butter made this way can be stored not for days, not for weeks, but for months or even years, sealed in animal skins or packed into leaves without refrigeration. Think of that. In a place with no electricity, no iceboxes, no cling film, people figured out how to preserve the most perishable of foods by squeezing, sealing, and trusting the cold mountain air. But of course, that's only the start of the story, because yak butter is not just for eating. Because if yak butter were merely food, this story would be interesting, but not especially unusual. People everywhere make butter. The Irish from their kindly cows, the Mongols from mares, even the Arctic peoples from reindeer, when they could. What makes yak butter remarkable is how it seeps into every crevice of Himalayan life, sometimes literally. Let's stay for a moment with the food. Yak butter finds its most celebrated role in butter tea. Picture a kettle of brick red tea brewed from compressed leaves imported centuries ago from China. Into its earthy brew go pinches of salt, a ladle of hot water, and most crucially, a scoop of yak butter. Then it's poured into a tall cylindrical churn and whisked until the tea turns into something unlike anything you've likely ever drunk. A frothy, salty, creamy liquid that is equal parts beverage and soup. Tibetans call it po cha. In Bhutan, it's suja. The first time you drink it, you might recoil. It is not sweet, it is not delicate. In fact, if the butter has aged a little too long, it may taste like someone liquefied a block of blue cheese and tipped it into your cup. But here's the thing. After a few days at altitude, when your lips crack and your body burns calories as though you were on a treadmill that never stops, that same odd salty tea feels like nectar. Tibetans sometimes drink 40, 50, even 60 cups a day, each a small replenishment of fat, salt and warmth. And when you visit, you will be offered a cup. And when you finish it, your host will refill it immediately, and again, until you realize that you are engaged in a battle of stamina with someone who has been training in butter tea consumption since childhood. But butter is not only drunk. It is kneaded with roasted barley flour into a paste called tsampa. Imagine oatmeal, only drier and more portable, rolled into small balls that can be eaten on the move. This combination of barley and butter has kept caravans moving across high passes for centuries. A traveller might set out with nothing more than a pouch of tsampa, a flask of tea and a spoon, and be perfectly sustained for days. Butter is also spread on flatbreads, melted into stews, and sometimes eaten straight from an energy bar avant la lettre. Now let's pivot. If butter tea is the daily heartbeat of the Himalayas, the butter lamp is its spiritual pulse. Walk into a monastery at dawn, and the first thing you'll notice before the chanting, before the murals, before the golden Buddhas looming in the shadows, is the glow of hundreds of small flames flickering in brass bowls. These are butter lamps, fueled by yak butter. Devotees bring precious lumps of butter as offerings, ladling them into lamps to keep the eternal flames alive. Each lamp represents the triumph of wisdom over darkness, and there is a quiet poetry in knowing that the very same butter you drank at breakfast is now illuminating an altar. And then, because human creativity knows no limit, we come to butter sculptures. Every year, monks sculpt yak butter into fantastical figures. Flowers, deities, whole tableau of myth and history, tinted with natural dyes. They stand luminous and delicate, sometimes 10 meters tall, glowing in the light of yet more butter lamps. And then, as soon as the festival ends, they melt, returning to formlessness, a spectacular reminder that everything is fleeting. Imagine Michelangelo's David that liquefied after 3 days, and you begin to appreciate the strangeness and beauty of this art. So, we've seen yak butter as food, as fuel, as art. But what about its making? Surely the story ends once the butter is churned. Except it doesn't. Because here's a question worth pondering. How do you make enough butter to sustain an entire family, let alone a whole culture, when each yak produces only a few litres of milk a day? The answer is with astonishing patience, cleverness, and an admirable willingness to spend hours a day plunging a stick in a barrel of milk. One female yak, technically a nak or dree, might give only 1 to 3 litres of milk in a day, sometimes less in the bitter cold of winter. To put that in perspective, a modern-day dairy cow in Wisconsin could easily outproduce her by 10 times. Yet, from that modest supply, Himalayan families managed to create enough butter to power their tea, their lamps, and their lives. This is why the churning methods are so ingenious. In summer, when milk is relatively plentiful, the process can be fairly regular. Collect the milk, let it ferment overnight into a tangy yogurt, warm it slightly, and churn. But in winter, when milk is scarce, families may save several days' worth, letting it thicken into a heavier curd before pouring it into those marvellous hide bags. These bags, often fashioned from the stomach of a sheep or goat, are tied tight and shaken until arms ache. Some herders, clever souls, discovered you could simply tie the bag behind a pony's saddle and let the animal do the shaking while trotting over mountain trails. It is butter by way of ingenuity and perhaps a touch of laziness, which is the mother of invention. Once the butter is extracted, it is carefully washed in cold water to remove traces of buttermilk. This step may sound fussy, but it is crucial. If buttermilk remains, it will sour and spoil the butter. The washing leaves behind a purer fat that, when pressed and moulded, can last far longer. Then comes the pressing, kneading the butter, squeezing out excess liquid, sometimes sprinkling in salt for taste and preservation. Imagine, if you will, a pair of hands working soft, golden lumps until they form a firm block, like sculpting but for survival. And now comes the marvel of storage. In lands without refrigerators or freezers, yak butter survives thanks to tradition. Families may wrap it up in rhododendron leaves, sew it into animal hides, or press it into airtight bags made of skin. Properly done, this butter keeps not for days, not for weeks, but for a year or more. Picture a sack of butter stowed away in a dark corner of a tent, waiting for winter, while storms roar outside and snow buries the world. When the sack is finally opened months later, the butter inside, though perhaps tangier, is still edible, still nourishing. Sometimes, though, the butter is left deliberately to age. The result is rancid butter, which sounds dreadful until you realise that in a cup of tea, the pungent cheesy tang is cherished. Aged butter takes on a bluish mould, much like a Stilton, and for many Tibetans this flavour is not a defect but a delight. Western palates may balk, but to locals it is a taste of home, as evocative as the smell of fresh bread might be to us. Now pause here for a moment. Consider the elegance of this system. In a place where resources are scarce, where milk is limited, every drop is maximised. Nothing is wasted. Even the skimmed buttermilk finds use, fed to pigs or calves or consumed as refreshing, if sour, drink. In the endless calculus of survival at altitude, yak butter is both a product and a strategy, a way of bottling sunshine and grass into a solid form that can be carried, traded, stored, and worshipped. But this leads us to yet another curiosity gap. In our age of stainless steel factories and industrial dairies, has yak butter remained a purely rustic affair? Or has the modern world come knocking at the tent flap with a shiny new machine? Well, as it turns out, the modern world has indeed tiptoed into the yak hair tents, carrying curious contraptions that whir and hum. In some Himalayan valleys today, you will find cream separators, hand-cranked or solar-powered machines that spin milk at dizzying speeds until the fat collects neatly in one container and the skim milk in another. This is a remarkable leap forward, for it allows families to make butter more quickly with less sweat and fewer sore arms. Elsewhere, cooperative dairies have sprung up. In Nepal's Ruby Valley, for example, villagers now deliver their modest buckets of yak milk to a central butter machine, which can churn in minutes what used to take hours of labour. One man remarked that before the machine, much of their milk soured or spoiled before it could be processed. Now they waste nothing. Butter is fresher, cleaner, and crucially, marketable in large quantities. Some herders even make a tidy living, earning sums that would have been unimaginable for their grandparents. And yet, even amid these whirring improvements, the process remains deeply tied to tradition. A separator may speed things along, but the flavour still comes from fermented milk, still shaped by the grass and herbs of the alpine meadows. A butter machine may churn efficiently, but the butter still finds its way into butter tea, still fuels the same lamps, still carries the same symbolism. It is a modernisation, yes, but not replacement. The markets too have changed. In Lhasa, you can now buy butter wrapped neatly in plastic, stacked in yellowish bricks at the bazaar. In Kathmandu, yak butter emerges from small factories in paper-wrapped parcels destined for city kitchens. But travel into the high valleys and you'll still see the old ways. A skin bag slung from a saddle, a wooden churn beside a tent, the rhythmic sound of plunging echoing against mountain walls. The two worlds exist side by side. What is fascinating is how yak butter has economic gravity far beyond its humble lumps. For centuries, herders carried sacks of butter to market towns to barter for grain or salt. In some places, butter even paid rents or taxes. It was, in effect, a currency. Imagine a landlord tallying up dues not in coins but in kilos of butter, or a monastery filling storerooms with donated butter to light lamps all winter. To this day, surplus butter is still traded, often in exchange for rice from the lowlands. It's hard to think of many other fats that doubled as both staple food and tax payment. And of course, there's the global curiosity. Trekking tourists arrive eager to taste authentic butter tea, or to photograph glowing butter lamps in monasteries. Some even bring back yak butter soaps or novelty jars of butter as souvenirs. One can almost imagine the bewilderment of a herder's grandmother who once packed butter into a goatskin for survival, learning that her grandchildren now sell a sliver of the same product to foreigners in Kathmandu boutiques at premium prices. So we must ask, beyond economy and modernisation, what is it that gives yak butter its lasting power? Why do people cling to it, even when cheaper oils and cow butter are available in cities? Well, the answer lies in its cultural and spiritual weight, a weight as heavy as the Himalayan mountains themselves. Here is where yak butter takes on a dimension that ordinary butter could scarcely dream of. In the West, butter is something you put on toast, or, if you're feeling indulgent, swirl into mashed potatoes. In Tibet and Bhutan, yak butter is the medium of devotion. Every monastery you enter is alive with its glow. The air is thick with a sweet, fatty scent, equal parts comforting and cloying. Pilgrims shuffle in, bearing small jars or wrapped lumps of butter as offerings, spooning them reverently into bowls where wicks float, flames trembling. These are the butter lamps, and they burn day and night as symbols of wisdom. And the symbolism doesn't stop there. During great festivals, monks create astonishing butter sculptures, extravagant, multicoloured works depicting gods, demons, flowers, and celestial landscapes. Imagine walking into a courtyard on a freezing night to see a towering sculpture of Avalokiteshvara, a thousand-armed deity rendered entirely from yak butter and pigment lit by hundreds of flickering lamps. For a few nights, the figures glow with life, and then, inevitably, they sag and melt. This is no accident. It is the point. The impermanence of beauty, the fleeting nature of all things taught, rather magnificently, through butter. And still, yak butter has even more roles. It is rubbed on chapped faces as a kind of moisturiser. It is worked into hair to add shine. It has been used to tan hides and waterproof boots. In earlier times, it was even daubed onto the body as a primitive sunscreen, a greasy armour against the brutal sun at altitude. It is hard to imagine a more versatile product. One animal, one small yield of milk, and yet from it comes fuel, food, art, ritual, commerce, and skincare. Nutritionally, yak butter is also unusual. Because yaks graze on wild alpine herbs, their milk fats contain more omega-3s and a compound called conjugated linoleic acid, CLA, to the scientifically inclined than typical cow's milk. These may or may not contribute to health in ways researchers are still puzzling over. What is certain is that yak butter is astonishingly energy-dense. 100 grams contains over 700 calories. For a herder walking 10 miles a day at 15,000 feet, that's not indulgence, that's survival. At first glance, yak butter seems an oddity, a quirky trivia answer. What's the weirdest butter you can think of? But by following its story, we've uncovered a kind of cultural Rosetta Stone. It is a window into how humans adapt to the harshest environments on Earth. It reveals the interplay of economy and ritual, of practicality and spirituality. It shows us that survival isn't just about calories and warmth, but about meaning, tradition, and even beauty. Yak butter sustains the body, yes, but it also sustains the spirit. And if you're curious enough to keep exploring the strange, ingenious ways people adapt and thrive, you might want to join us in the next story, where we'll look at another food that has shaped cultures in equally unexpected ways. Because if yak butter teaches us anything, it's that the humble and the extraordinary are often separated only by context. Please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. Believe it or not, 99% of our viewers haven't hit that subscribe button yet. It's totally free and just takes a second. We've got tons of cool stuff coming your way, and in the meantime, leave a comment down below. Share your thoughts with us. Your support helps us to keep exploring and uncovering the hidden side of what we eat. So, don't be shy, hit that subscribe button and age like fine butter.